Have you ever finished a long day? You shut your laptop, but your brain just keeps going. It feels like you're on this mental treadmill and you just can't find the stop button. Well, if that's you, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to dive into the science of why our brains get stuck in that on mode, and more importantly, how we can finally find that off switch. So let's start with a big question. Does your brain even have an off switch? Because sometimes it really doesn't feel like it, does it? That feeling of replaying conversations from work or stressing about tomorrow's to-do list while you're supposed to be relaxing, it's something so many of us go through. But it turns out there's a name for this mental static, and thankfully, there are solutions. These words from a PhD student just capture the feeling perfectly. It's not just about being tired. It's about being trapped in a mental loop, just desperately looking for a way out so you can get the rest you know your body and mind are screaming for. This is really the core of what we're talking about today. So first up, let's talk about that never-ending loop. Why is it that even when we try to take a break, our minds just seem to have a completely different agenda? For the student we just heard from, this was the biggest problem. They'd try to take a break, but their mind would just boomerang right back to thinking about papers and research. It's that classic feeling, right? Your body is physically on the couch, but your brain is still mentally at the office, clocked in and running at full speed. Sound familiar? Okay, so let's put a name to this stuck feeling. We're going to shift from just talking about the experience to understanding the actual science behind it. Because once you can name something, you can start to understand it and manage it. And here is our first big term, perseverative cognition. Yeah, it sounds a little academic, but it's just the scientific name for that stuck record of repetitive thoughts, rumination and worry. Research actually links this pattern directly to health problems. So the big takeaway here is this isn't just you overthinking. It's a real, recognized cognitive process. So what happens when that perseverative cognition goes on and on, unchecked? Well, you hit a wall, and that wall is called burnout. WebMD defines it as the state of just complete exhaustion, emotional, physical, and mental, all caused by stress that's just gone on for way too long. It's what happens when your brain's alarm system gets stuck in the on position. Burnout usually shows up in three main ways. First, there's the exhaustion. This is that deep, bone-tired feeling where you just have no energy left. Then comes alienation, where you start to feel cynical, maybe even resentful, and just totally disconnected from your work. And finally, reduced performance, where you can't concentrate, your creativity is gone, and just getting things done feels impossible. Do any of those ring a bell? Now let's add one more layer here. What's often happening is something called executive dysfunction. According to the Cleveland Clinic, this is when your brain's CEO, the part that manages your thoughts, emotions, and actions, is basically offline. So that feeling of not being able to start relaxing or stop thinking about work, it is not a moral feeling, it's not laziness, it is a neurological struggle. Okay, so we've talked about the what, but now let's get into the why. What is actually going on inside our bodies, inside our brains, when we get trapped in this state of chronic stress? Well, the Mayo Clinic explains our body's alarm system perfectly. The moment your brain perceives a threat, and that could be a looming deadline just as much as a tiger, your hypothalamus, the command center, hits the panic button. That triggers a flood of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which kicks your whole body into fight or flight mode. Your heart pounds, your blood pressure goes up, you're ready to deal with the danger. And that system is an absolute lifesaver for short-term threats. But the problem with modern stress is that the threat, that overflowing inbox, that difficult project, it never really goes away. The result? Your fight or flight response stays on. And this long-term activation can seriously mess with your health, leading to everything from anxiety and sleep problems to heart disease. So what's the engine driving all this constant mental churn? Well, it's often a part of your brain called the default mode network. You can think of it as your brain's idle setting, what it does when you're not focused on a specific task. But when you're chronically stressed, that idle mode gets stuck in overdrive. Instead of just quiet daydreaming, it starts obsessively scanning for future problems and replaying past ones, keeping you on high alert. So, what on earth can we do about this? This brings us to a really big shift in how we think about the problem. What if, instead of constantly fighting to stop our thoughts, the real answer is to learn how to accept them? This is where we see a really interesting contrast. On one hand, you have traditional approaches like CBT, which often focus on changing or fixing negative thoughts. But then there's a different approach called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, and its goal is totally different. It's about accepting those thoughts and feelings without judgment, and instead focusing your energy on taking actions that align with what's truly important to you. See, the point of ACT isn't to make bad feelings go away. The goal is to build something called psychological flexibility. It's the ability to be open to all of your experiences, the good and the bad, and to keep moving toward a meaningful life, even when those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings are tagging along for the ride. All right, this brings us to the really good stuff, the actionable, science-backed strategies for recovery. If we can't just flip an off switch, how do we actively create it? This mindset of acceptance is the key because it stops that internal war and opens a door to something called deep rest. Researchers at the University of California define deep rest as something that goes way beyond just chilling on the couch. It's an actual physiological state where your body goes into cellular recovery mode, and it's triggered when you send your nervous system signals of safety, signals that finally tell it, hey, it's okay, you can power down the alarm system now. And when we hit that state of deep rest, our bodies get to work. I mean, it is a powerhouse at the cellular level. It kicks on autophagy, which is like a cleanup crew for your cells. It improves the health of your mitochondria, your little cellular power plants. And it even boosts an enzyme that protects the ends of your DNA from getting frayed by stress. It's amazing stuff. So, how do we get there? Here's a super powerful tool, the transition ritual. Think of it like a clutch in a car, helping you shift gears from work mode to rest mode. It's simple. First, just notice a little thing you already do that helps you switch tasks. Then, be really intentional about doing it between work and rest. Maybe it's shutting your laptop and putting it in a bag, or changing out of your work clothes, or playing one specific song. Then just repeat it. Over time, that tiny action becomes a powerful automatic cue for your brain to switch off. And of course, creating practical boundaries is totally non-negotiable. This could mean setting a digital sunset, a hard stop time for all work screens. If you can, have a designated workspace to create a physical separation. Actually, take your breaks away from your desk. And this one is huge. Give yourself permission to say no. You have to guard your downtime as fiercely as you would a major work deadline. The best part is there are so many ways to cultivate deep rest, and it is not one size fits all. For you, it might be meditation or yoga. It could be spending time in nature. Or maybe it's losing yourself in a hobby like painting or gardening, or simply connecting with people who make you feel safe and supported. The common thread in all of these is that they send those powerful signals of safety to your nervous system. And let's bring it all back to that PhD student we started with. They were actually skeptical about meditation. It didn't feel practical. But then they found a meditation group on campus, which made it easy, accessible, and social. And it turned out to be the exact mechanism they were looking for. A real practical tool that helped them finally break that academic loop and get the rest they so desperately needed. So in the end, turning off your work brain isn't about finding some magical hidden switch. It's about intentionally and consistently building the rituals, the boundaries, and the practices that signal safety to your mind and your body. Your brain is absolutely ready for deep rest. So the only question left is this: what is the first ritual you're going to try?